Hello and welcome to the Lean on Agile show. I'm your host Shaheen, and I have Steve today with me as our guest to have a conversation with him. I know Steve through lots of community events. He's a very active person in the DevOps community. He is a very well-known speaker as well, and he is attending some of the meetups that I am attending as well in the Agile space. That's how we get to know each other, and we share a similar interest on value stream mapping, and that's what we are going to talk today about. I won't do the justice introducing Steve, so I'm going to rely on him to do the proper introduction. Steve, thanks for being on the show.
Thanks very much, Shaheen. So I've been in tech for about 20 years, previously a CTO in a startup environment, but I've been through a couple of enterprise and startup environments. And really the thread that I followed throughout my career is this idea of flow, which is very present in Lean, in Agile, in transformation. But I've just always had this sort of passion for workflow and continuous improvement. And actually discovered value stream mapping and value streams fairly late in my career, but looking back on my progress and looking back on the things that I like to do with teams, and when I encounter difficult problems, it often comes back to the value stream.
What gets you back to the value stream?
I'm sort of a big picture person. So what happens is I get caught in the details, and I really like ways of pulling myself out and looking at the big picture and considering things from different perspectives, trying to find what I'm missing, because I can spend a lot of time working away on something that I think is important or that's captured my attention. And meanwhile, there's something else somewhere that has 10 times the return on investment, and or it would be so much easier if I just changed my perspective and really looked at what was going on from a broader perspective. So for me, a value stream map is a way of sort of pulling that focus away from the details and looking at the big picture and trying to figure out where should we be focusing our time and energy to get the best results.
Can you tell us what value stream map is for the audience that don't know what value stream map is?
Sure. So the history of value stream mapping comes out of the 1980s and 90s. I think car manufacturing, traditional manufacturing, we were looking at trying to optimize factories and trying to optimize production of physical goods. And really, once you spend a lot of time in that area and you're trying to squeeze out the last drop of productivity, because everything has been optimized. We'd been building physical products for so long using traditional factory manufacturing assembly line processes that really measuring everything with a stopwatch as precisely as possible was how we were figuring out where our bottlenecks are and where we should be focusing our efforts on improving efficiency and effectiveness. And so I learned about this a little bit when I went to business school for a while, because it was very much a traditional business education. Mm-hmm. And so it touched on some of these legacy practices. But for me, it resonated in the context that I was working, which was software development. We have very much a sequential, repeated activity. Although it's creative, there is a lot of the process that is mundane and almost automated if we are raising the level of sophistication that we're working at. So I saw a lot of opportunities to sort of apply this pattern and this thinking to software development. And I think that what it does is we can draw out this picture, and as we get rid of the manual tasks and the tedious tasks and the things that are taking up time when they don't need to, we can focus on the creative aspects of software development because we'll have more time to be creative.
Right.
And that's the appeal for me. So that's kind of the theory behind this. In practice, what a value stream looks like is a lot like a process. It's roughly equivalent to a process. Oftentimes what people are looking at when they're thinking of value streams is a step above a typical process. You're looking at an organization. So in the manufacturing world, that starts with getting raw materials and then shipping, let's say, a car to a customer. So big, long, it's the whole business basically, right? And of course, what I like to do in the software world is kind of dig in a little bit further and look at each individual team, each individual process that gets repeated on a regular basis and what it looks like. And so what the actual process of creating a value stream map looks like is essentially there's two pieces. There's steps and timing. Or measurement, because we measure a little bit more than timing if we're adding detail. So if you're thinking of a process of, for instance, making a cup of coffee, you've got coffee beans on one end, coffee on the other. Every step of the process is a step in the value stream in that context, and measuring how long it takes to perform each step is where we will discover opportunities for improvement. So if it takes me forever to make a cup of coffee in the morning because I don't have a clean mug, and every time I go to make a cup of coffee, I've got to stop, clean a mug, and so that I can continue on with the process, that's probably an area that I could optimize by cleaning the mug ahead of time, right? So this, in the software context, really looks like, what are all the moving pieces involved in creating a change or a feature? And what are the pieces that are taking up most of the time? And do they have to take up all that time, right? How much of that time is actually adding value, and how much of it might be wasteful?
So would it be fair to say that value stream mapping is a tool to optimize the process? Or is it more than that?
That's in a nutshell. I think that's a pretty great summary of the process. I think what we're looking at is trying to optimize not only performance, but in many cases it's happiness too, because we don't like to do things that aren't valuable. We don't like to waste time. So if we're looking at opportunities to make things better, oftentimes that makes people happier too.
So you mentioned about value stream mapping. Which is the most sophisticated or more challenging part of it? Is the value, is it a stream, or the mapping part of it?
It's a trick question, actually. The hardest part of any of this is the people part, right? Okay. It's just like anything else in lean and agile and change. The people part is always the hardest part. So really, I think a robot could do a lot of the activities of value stream mapping. The challenging part, and where it helps to have a facilitator with some experience, is to manage the human aspect, the human factors of value stream mapping. Because what we're doing when we look at a value stream is we're judging it to a degree, right? We're measuring, we're looking at reality, and we're trying to sort of illustrate and portray reality in a way that we can improve it. So what happens is, when you step on the scale, sometimes you don't like what you see, right? And sometimes when you take a hard look at how you spend your time, or your progress towards any goal, it can be challenging to confront that reality and look at what's really going on, right? And in a software organization, it's a very complex environment. There's a lot of personalities, there's a lot of goals and incentives, and a lot of different understandings about where we should be focusing our time and energy. So navigating that, I think, is the biggest challenge.
Right. You mentioned people is the most challenging part of any change, which I definitely agree to. I want to ask, what are the success factors for value stream mapping? So people definitely is one of them. What else, if you want to have a successful value stream map and the outcome of it, what do you need to have?
That's a great question, actually. I don't get asked that question very often, but I think that when we're looking at success for a mapping exercise, what we want is just enough detail, right? I think spending too much time creating the map yields diminishing returns, right? So if we're spending 4 to 8 hours creating a value stream map, we're exhausting the team, right? It's very draining to be analyzing a process, especially as a group. So if we're pulling people together out of their workday, it can be really tough to keep everybody on track for that amount of time. So I think that getting the detail right and focusing on the right portion of the value stream, that's really going to drive success, because you can spend a lot of time on detail that's not very valuable. I've heard of value stream mapping exercises that have taken a week and ended up with 2,000 steps. And at the end of that, no one wants to look at it. Nobody wants to even think about it. So, the level of value that you get out of that level of detail, you're working backwards, right? You're worse than when you started. So I think a successful value stream map is just enough detail for us to make very confident decisions on where we should be investing our time and energy. And so I try and leave teams with the top 3 things that I observe in the value stream, and those can be risks, those can be opportunities, but it's a short, high value list of things to focus energy on, not a million things that come up. It's really, what are the things that we can start working on right now that are going to make a difference, and the value comes from that clarity that you get out of having the picture, but also the measurement to validate your assumptions.
Right. So if I understood correctly, from what you said, if someone is doing value stream mapping on their own and not involving the team, probably they are not doing something right, because I have seen instances of that there are some, how do I put their names? I don't want to call them coaches, but process optimizers. They go there and they just look at the process and they use this tool to streamline. But you mentioned that you're having the team there, you're having a talk to them, clarity with them, right?
Yeah, I think the collaborative aspect of it is really important, because the way that we get the best image of reality is through a diversity of perspectives, right? We want the people doing the work on a regular basis to be heard. We want the leadership to be heard. We want the people, in some cases outside the team in question, to be heard. I've been through quite a few value stream mapping exercises where we map a process start to finish, and it turns out that most of the time is spent in an area where nobody was actually invited to the meeting. And you'll have aspects of software development where success people, support people, salespeople in some cases aren't brought into the picture. And so there's this sort of gap or this foggy area of the value stream that doesn't get analyzed. And that's usually where a lot of problems lie. So I think that having more voices and more perspectives in the process, to a degree, because you don't want too many chefs in the kitchen, right. But there's kind of an art to finding the right number of perspectives so that you get the full picture.
Right. And I guess for finding that artful person, they have to talk to you.
Well, it helps to have some guiding criteria, for sure. I think that when I'm looking at setting up a value stream mapping exercise, We kind of want to hear from the people who are complaining, people who are
Mm-hmm.
negatively impacted by the process as it is, people who might be affected by changes. So if the leadership is looking to reorganize things or optimize things, who might be affected by those actions and those changes. So we want to bring them in and get their perspective, because otherwise there's all kinds of negative outcomes that could occur. And it helps to have that variety of perspectives, because there there's usually a reason why the team wants to do value stream mapping exercise. It's usually to either prove themselves right or figure out if they're
Mm-hmm.
missing something. So in a
Right.
lot of cases, we've got a hypothesis that we're pursuing, and we want to look at whether um, it's a good bet or whether we're missing something, and there's a better investment out there.
I'm thinking of value stream mapping, or when I use that is in a room with a big whiteboard with lots of sticky notes, and people are sitting around and they're talking. There might be some side conversation going alongside, which is good. In these days, how would you manage to have a value stream mapping session? Any tips or tricks for people to use doing it remotely? Any failures that you had? Any success stories that you have?
Yeah, I think that it's definitely possible to perform value stream mapping remotely, and I've done it several times with a lot of success. Actually, I find that there are things that you miss by not being in the same room, but there are things that you gain as well. So if you're looking at situations where um, we encounter very often are we have some remote team members, or we have some people who can't be in the session, um, and that was a reality even before um, quarantine lockdowns and working from home full time. And so having some kind of electronic digital aspect to the value stream mapping exercise was always a part of it for me. It was always a plan B that I needed to prepare for. So I've done quite a few with various tools, and I've used everything from Google Drawings to PowerPoint to um, Google Sheets. In some cases, I just use a
Okay.
spreadsheet. If I'm in an environment where everyone is focused on data and they'd rather look at Excel all day, then I'll use a spreadsheet. You know, I try to sort of speak the language of the team, and there are more sophisticated tools. There's Miro and Mural these days that are becoming much more widely adopted, and they have some great features like you can have anonymous voting, so that can increase the level of psychological safety on the team, so that people feel like they can share their opinions because it's an anonymous exercise. So that can be a benefit that you don't get from an in-person session, and I think it's really valuable.
Right, right. So we are talking a lot about value stream mapping, and it seems to be a very good tool to use, which I agree. But let me ask you this question: what's value stream mapping not good for?
Very good question. I think that any tool sort of in isolation has weaknesses, right? I mean, if you're only following um, one guideline, you're probably missing some information, and I kind of relate these kind of tools into two categories of maps and compasses. And there's lots of maps and there's lots of compasses, but using one without the other usually puts you in a tough position. You know, it's usually leaving you in a disadvantage. So what I like to do with a value stream mapping exercise is pair it with a compass, like a North Star metric, for instance,
Mm-hmm.
or company goals, or some kind of direction that is going to guide the efforts of the value stream mapping exercise. And without that, it's a lot less effective, because you don't
Mm-hmm.
really know what you're trying to do, right? You don't
Right.
know the larger goal, and that again is like working without pulling back and looking at the big picture. So what you can do with the value stream map, I think, is look at historical data for one thing. It's not going to predict the future. It can help you design the future, but it's not going to help you sort of forecast and predict things. There's other tools that we can use for that. And I think it doesn't really give you a perfect view of everything that's happening in the team, right? You've got to use other tools to be able to get a sense for why things might be underperforming, right, compared to expectations, or why certain things are complicated, where quality is breaking down. Like, quality is not incredibly relevant to a value stream mapping exercise. We can measure things like percent complete and accurate. So as you're going through, you can measure at each step what percentage of the work that we're completing is complete by definition and accurate. So you're testing at each stage, but we're just sort of capturing that as a metric. We're not really looking in detail at the actual quality, right? We're looking at measurements of quality. So I think it's a great tool for quickly measuring performance, but you also have to rely on other tools to maximize the value. So something like value stream mapping pairs really well with value stream management, for instance. So once you create the map, you can use that to inform a management tool that will track your measurements over time. And that can give you a better indication of what to expect in the future and how you're performing in closer to real time.
This value stream management tool, something related to OKR? Because these days OKR is becoming very popular.
OKRs are certainly becoming very popular. I would say that you can certainly plug in OKR metrics and objectives as factors to be considered in your value stream. In a management context, I think that there's several tools that allow you to do similar things, like track specific goals against your value stream performance. But OKRs are not always easy to map onto a value stream, depending on what your OKRs are.
I was talking to Jim Benson the other night, like last week, on personal Kanban and how to use that. He's a very well-known person on Kanban. I asked him about some of the good resources for people new to Agile to read, and he was telling that if something is around Agile, don't read that. Go and read the things that was there before Agile. And this resonated with me when you said that you found out this value stream map and it was there even long time before that. It was from the manufacturing times, right? So that now we are bringing it to the knowledge industry. So is the value stream map the next phase of DevOps, or is DevOps is the kind of new wrapping around that? Because you're looking at the big picture, and these days I'm seeing lots of buzzwords around Dev Biz Ops, right? Then Dev Biz Test Ops. Like this DevOps is becoming bigger and bigger and becoming a value stream for itself, right? So, and I know you have talk in DevOps conferences. So I just want to know your thought process about value stream and DevOps. How do they go hand in hand? Are they the same thing?
Yeah, so I think that I'm no fan of overloading terms. And I think naming is a very challenging subject. In the case of value stream mapping and value stream management, they have this sort of legacy context and history. And yet, I don't really want to fight a war to kind of re-establish the terminology in modern terms or brand it in any specific way. I think that to to help some people from getting stuck. Sometimes I'll talk in terms of flow engineering and optimizing for flow. But I think that the value in something like value stream mapping is the presence of value, and I think that is
Mm-hmm.
something that's always been missing from DevOps and conversations about
Right.
DevOps and Agile alike. I think that it's very easy for people to forget about value and the fact that we're doing these things for customers at the end of the day. We're not doing them for ourselves, uh, or we shouldn't be.
Right.
And we have to be careful to keep that in mind. And that's what I really like about the value stream and terminology around the value stream, is that it's always keeping it in context for me, that the goal hasn't changed. The goal is always delivering value to customers. And the stream aspect of value streams focuses it even further on flow. We
Mm-hmm.
have to make sure that to achieve flow of value, it's continuous. And we're always heading, in a very specific direction, and always trying to work around bottlenecks and optimize the efficiency of that stream. So I really like the terminology. Whereas in DevOps, I gave a lot of talks back in 2014 and early days when I was speaking at the very beginning about terminology, because so many people get stuck on DevOps and disagreeing about what it means, and it doesn't matter at all. Really, at
Right.
the end of the day, it's what are we doing to improve flow and value, right?
Right.
So we should be talking about um, automating configuration. We should be talking about automated testing. We should be talking about um, feature flags and feature toggles. We should be
Right.
talking about specific things. And the value stream really helps me to illustrate to teams that we don't have to talk about the big picture all the time. If we
Mm-hmm.
break things down and combine what's going on with measurements of what's going on, then we can talk about specific things. So all of a sudden we go from talking about DevOps to talking about automated testing, because automated testing is our bottleneck. And that's what we should care about and focus on, not the term or the area that we want to focus on. It's what do our customers need us to focus on.
Just when you were talking about this question came to my mind. It might sound like a dumb question, but I'm just going to ask it. Like if it's dumb, just tell me.
There are no
So
dumb questions.
yeah,
That's the
have
rule.
have you ever used a value stream map with a team that it's a leadership team? It's not a team that provides like or delivers code or some product or service. They're a leadership team. And have you used that? And do you have any experience to share with us? Any learnings from that?
Yeah, that's a great question. I actually always start with leadership. So whenever I'm working with an organization, the first stream that I create is a very high level, almost organization level value stream, just to get context, get everybody on the same page, and take them through an exercise in a subject area that they are very comfortable in, right? They're focused at the higher level. So the first one that we draw is a high level value stream that very much resembles a traditional value stream of raw materials to customer value. So we look at how does the business actually make money, right? How does the business serve its customers? And then from there, we can dig in. So this gives everybody the context and the comfort level with value stream mapping in a language that they are very familiar with, so that then we can dig into software engineering or customer onboarding or new employee onboarding or the sales process or wherever we're going to run our value stream map. And because they're coming from a position of comfort and familiarity, they can easily follow along because they've got that context. So I think it's really important to start at as high as possible in leadership. That being said, you mentioned before about people doing value stream maps on their own. And in some cases, we can't get leadership on board. So we've got to work from the opposite perspective.
Right.
It's not impossible. You can create a value stream map from your own view with a bunch of gaps for areas that you don't understand.
Right.
And then you have something to share with people, so it can be constructive in that sense. You can create something that you can share with people and say, I'm not so sure about these parts, and I'm not sure what's going on here. So can you help me build out this picture? So it's best to, as with anything change related, it's always best to start from the bottom, but there's a grassroots approach as well.
Right. What would Steve be known as if he didn't explored or discovered value stream map?
Oh, great question. I suppose I would have still moved into strategy and change and transformation. I think that's always been a passion of mine, and I've always been sort of a high level, big picture kind of person. So there's a lot of areas without value streams. I'm very interested in things like capability maps. I've been spending a lot of time on impact mapping recently. I found a lot of relevance for things like Wordly mapping, which are things that, in some cases they work really well. In some cases, at a strategic level, when you're trying to figure out what to do in an organization, how to navigate situations, which is very timely right now. All of that kind of visual, high level strategic work is what I'm really passionate about, and that's what I naturally gravitate to. So the value stream is my favorite because it's so customer focused. It really is the engine of the business. So I just think it's more relevant than anything else that I could focus on. But without it, there's always a big picture to chase, and there's always a visual aspect of strategy and transformation that I'm really interested in.
Right. Nice. I have left my the most challenging question that I could have thought of to the end. It might be very easy for you to answer, and then we have some guest audience on the panel, so they are going to ask you some questions if they have. If you have to describe value stream map to a 4-year-old, how would you describe that? That's my question.
That's a great question. I can't believe I'm unprepared for this. I would say, really relating to a 4-year-old, if I'm going to put a value stream map in context, it's going to be walking through the process of something like eating a bowl of cereal in the morning, right? I mean, what is the process that is hidden behind something that we do on a regular basis? So in the case of my nieces and nephews, what they care about is really like it could be getting ready for school every morning, right? The value stream is starting from when you wake up to you're at school and you're ready to go. So what are we doing to prepare, to get ready, to arrive on time, and to make sure that we don't miss the bus, right? So I think that looking at any process in the context of what's going on, what is the sequence of events, what are all the dependencies, what's all the timing. Obviously, dependencies is a terrible word to use for a 4-year-old, but I hope that shares the gist.
Right. Okay, so we are 15-20 minutes to the time that we have. I want to open it up to our guest listeners. This is the first time the listeners of the podcast that we are doing this, and thanks to Steve for accepting to do such an experiment.
I think this is great.
Yeah. So if anyone has any questions, you are more than welcome to unmute yourself and ask Steve the question.
Hi, Steve. This is Ali.
Hey, Ali.
Hey. So I had a question. How have you sold value stream mapping in a very risk-averse leadership group? Have you had that experience before? Because I'm a big believer of value stream mapping, but I feel that the leaders I'm working with, they kind of don't want to uncover what's under the hood for various reasons. So have you had that experience, and how have you been successful there?
Yeah, I think that a lot of people will find this trying to perform value stream mapping internally inside of their organizations coming in as a consultant from outside, it's usually someone's already decided to do it. So I get off the hook pretty often on that side of it. But at the same time, I have goals as well to make sure that they're doing value stream mapping as much as possible, and they're building the best picture of the organization. So even if I'm brought in, I have to sell the idea. And I think that I've got to do a lot of convincing that this is a psychologically safe exercise, and try and tap into the vision of the organization and their immediate and long-term goals in order to connect the value of value stream mapping, the value of that data, the picture of what's going on, to how it will help them achieve those goals and that vision. So, like any change effort in other aspects, I think connecting it with an overarching strategy and trying to connect as well with individual strategies. So I try to dig into what those individual leaders are struggling with, where they think the problems are, and then I can focus my efforts on either trying to approach it from a perspective of validating their assumptions, so to make them more confident in what they think is already reality, and then protecting them from anything that could surprise them, right? I mean, when we look at a value stream map, we're highlighting opportunities, but we're also highlighting risks. And I think that in these change-averse environments and risk-averse environments, they want to know about those risks before they become real problems. So I think highlighting that aspect of it, connecting it back to the overall vision, trying to resonate on a personal level with those leaders to align with their goals and what they're hoping to achieve, is kind of this combination that can help reassure people that this is an exercise that's not just going to pull up the rug and show what's underneath. It's in an effort of increased alignment, increased performance, and an increased transparency in a way that's not destructive. It's really in growing a stronger understanding of what opportunities we could be taking advantage of, and what risks we can avoid.
Thanks, Ali, for the question.
So I've got a question for you, Steve. So what's one of the most interesting things you've uncovered in your value stream mapping exercises that's really helped an organization move forward?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know about interesting. I would say surprising, maybe. One that I always like to remember is I was brought into an extremely large organization last year, and they had an extremely complex value stream and a lot of money to put towards improvement efforts. But they wanted to basically check their math and make sure that if they were going to be putting $20 million into some improvement effort, that it was going to make a difference. It was going to move the needle. So they were thinking of automated deployments would be this opportunity for them to really improve their release cadence and their velocity. And but by looking at the value stream, we actually discovered that it was environment creation and automated testing. And automated testing ended up being almost double the amount of time and effort that the environment creation was, and the automated testing would have only saved a tiny percentage of the total value stream. So I think those are cases where we'll often discover something surprising in the value stream by looking at the measurements, because the improvement isn't often where you think it is, especially when you're in a leadership position and you're not the person who's doing the work on a regular basis. You're pulled away with a different perspective And so by doing the value stream map, you can sort of highlight these hidden opportunities and hidden risks. And that's always really surprising and rewarding, especially when you get to save $20 million.
Thanks. I got another slight question. You were talking about quality earlier, and when we look at the rework that gets generated when something fails to move through the value stream, could you talk a little bit about what the impact that has on how you do those measurements and identify the right places to focus?
Yeah, another great question. And I think this is one of the most challenging aspects of value stream mapping, because when we create a value stream map, we're really looking at what is the most common path from start to finish, and in a lot of organizations, it branches out, and it can be incredibly complex and complicated. And so it can be challenging to keep track of what is the single path that we want to follow and measure. And also, when we have cases of rework, it's not naturally captured in something like a value stream map. If we're looking at the history and traditional manufacturing, we're creating, let's say, a car. Oftentimes when you have a defect in the car, it's still going all the way through, right? It's still going all the way through the assembly line, and we might catch it at the very end. Maybe not. Maybe it goes all the way to customers, right? That works very well in a value stream map. In software, what often happens is as we do more small scale testing more often earlier in the process, we're catching defects and sending them back, right, to be corrected, because it's very expensive to go all the way to a customer and find out that something's broken. So what we'll do is to capture that, I'll put some looping into the diagram to indicate that 60% of the time or 40% of the time, when a engineer gets a ticket from a product team, it's missing some detail, for instance, or it's missing some satisfaction criteria, acceptance criteria, for instance, and it has to be sent back to the product team. We want to capture that because we want to avoid that, right? We want to facilitate that flow throughout the system with minimal disruption, and it makes it hard to really measure. So we kind of have to capture this percentage of occurrence as a rough guideline, and it really is a rough guess. I'll ask a couple people to figure out how often is this being sent back and how often is this a problem. And if it seems like it rarely happens, it might not get captured. But if it's a significant portion of the time, putting it in there can make a big difference, because if we have a case where upstream, so let's say at the beginning of a process, we have something that takes, let's say 5 hours, and downstream we have something that takes 15 hours. But as we progress through the value stream, we are going back to the start because we've realized that something is missing or something needs to be fixed. Then all of a sudden you're incurring that 5 hours over and over again, and it starts to compare to that 15 hours downstream, right? So that can affect where we focus our energy, because if we're constantly repeating an expensive step in the process, that might be where we should focus our energy. And it's this measurement of quality and the measurement of how often we are sending things back and having rework that is going to highlight those areas of the value stream as potential candidates for optimization.
Thank you. That was great.
I hope that makes sense. It's hard to illustrate without a whiteboard, but maybe we'll do another session where I can draw out a bunch of these or share some resources.
Yeah, I got it.
Thank you. We have some time for one or two more questions, if there is any.
Steve, Nasima here. Have you ever observed that value stream map is not working for an organization at any level?
Oh, absolutely. I have seen it fall flat. And I think that it's like any change initiative, any transformation effort, if it's not carried through, if it's not implemented in an environment that's receptive to change and has a level of urgency and all the other ingredients that are necessary to make a change effective, it can just be an exercise that results in very little outcome. So rather than being an isolated exercise, I've tried to approach it from a program perspective, right? So from laying the groundwork and getting everybody prepared to actually coaching towards the future state. Once we create a future state value stream map, I think it's important to have a facilitator and a coach present to guide that process so that the value stream map doesn't just become this artifact in a knowledge base, but it's really a living document almost, guiding people throughout a transformation towards a future state.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Steve, I have a question myself for you. So for the people that are starting to hear value stream mapping, what would you suggest, or where would you suggest them to start from? Is there any resource, any website that you suggest them to start with?
Yeah, actually it can be tough because I think that there's a lot of material that focuses on legacy value stream mapping. So traditional physical goods manufacturing with a lot of complexity and symbols that people won't understand. There's giant books on the subject, but I think that we're starting to see some more modern lean approaches to value stream mapping published online. I've got a list of resources that I can share. I try to boil it all down on my website. I'm building a series on value stream mapping, starting from what is a value stream, all the way through what should they look like, what should we be measuring, how does it compare to other types of maps and other types of resources. And my website is thinking.visible.is, and I can share that with you folks. Yeah. And that's really sort of from a introductory, you might not know anything about even software, to getting a good grasp of what this is and even how to do it inside your own organization.
Yeah, for sure. We are going to put that in the show notes, the resources that you mentioned, your website, and some of the things that we do, like Wordly Map and all those things that we talked about. Is there anyone in the industry that inspired you and or that you admire that you want to tell other people about?
Oh, that's a great question. I tend to be terrible with names, but there are quite a few, and I've discovered some really good ones. There's a gentleman named Mike Orzen, who we can throw a link to, who has great talks and content around measuring and optimization. There is Karen Martin is actually one of the most recent value stream experts. She wrote an incredible book. She's really been, I think, the main voice behind value streams for a very long time. And so reading her content was really valuable to me. Jack Maher is another person who has been doing value stream mapping for quite a long time. Marc Hornbeek is another great voice in the space. There are so many, and I could probably give quite a good list of other people who are sharing lots of value on the subject.
Right. Thank you. We are coming to an end for this episode. Is there anything that you wanted to share that we didn't talk about?
No, this was very thorough. You guys grilled me pretty good, and I really enjoyed it. Yeah, I'm hoping to do more of this. I'm trying to put together a little bit of a community around flow that actually Peter and I are trying to come together and collect people who are thinking about value and flow, and because I think it's a subject that we don't talk about often enough, and at the end of the day it's so important. So stay tuned for that. I'll definitely be sharing that as that comes together, and we hope to see everybody there.
Right. And for our audience, how they can, if they have any questions, how they can get in touch with you?
Oh, great question. So I've got a website at visible.is, as in it's Icelandic, but it was an available domain. So visible.is has everything from what I do as a facilitator and a consultant to the content on my thinking site that's all focused on value streams. And I'm pretty active on LinkedIn, and you could find the link for that through my website as well. I've got a personal website, stevepereira.ca, but I usually spend all my time at work. So visible.is is the place to go.
Right. Thank you again, Steve, to being on the show. It was a true pleasure having a chat with you on Value Stream Map.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.